So we've been using React hooks for a number of projects within the past year, and we've experienced a number of issues that I want to share within this video series. The issue that I want to discuss within this particular lesson is that React hooks don't compose the same way that React components compose. Let's jump into the code and see what that means. So in a previous lesson, we've actually talked about the process of creating a hook in order to use a component. Here we have a counter component that requires an increment function wired to a button and displays the current count. And then we have a hook called useCounter that provides the functionality that is required by the counter component. And then within our main application, we can go ahead and use this counter component by using the hook within the hook section and then using the component within the component section. For example, if you wanted to use the counter component over here, we can go ahead and create a counter1, call the counter hook, and then return that. And then when we are rendering, we'll go ahead and render the counter component and provide the value from the app state. And now we get a nice interactive counter component within the UI. Now, if we wanted to create another counter component, all that we need to do is call the hook again. And let's say we want to show the sum as well. We can easily calculate that from the counts of the current two counters. And then we can return that as well. And then within our UI, we can render the second counter as well, wire it to the second hook, and then show the sum as well. And you can see the two counters as well as the sum of the two counters showing up in the UI. Now this method of reuse is great when we have a static number of counters. For example, here we have two counters and then we are displaying its sum. Now let's imagine we want to have an arbitrary number of counters. For that, we will go ahead and maintain the count for the number of counters that we have. And then we will create a function to create a new counter. And then for all of this count of counters, we will go ahead and call useCounter to create the counters. And then for the sum, we will simply loop over the current counters and sum their values. And finally, we return the ability to add a counter as well as the current list of counters. And then within our application, instead of having these two static counter components, we will go ahead and create a button to add another counter. And then for each of these counters, we will go ahead and map to create a new counter component with its use value. And now we run into a very common issue with React hooks. The number of calls to useCounter is dependent upon the value that is stored in the count variable. And you cannot have a dynamic number of hook calls within a React application. And we can see this issue within our application. The single counter works fine. However, as soon as we try to go ahead and add another counter, the number of useCounter calls will change, and therefore you will get this error. Rendered more hooks than during the previous render. Now there are various ways to overcome this issue. However, they all require you to fundamentally restructure your application. For example, instead of maintaining the count of each counter in its own React use state, you can maintain a single array and then just pass in the values to the counter components, and then sum that array instead of summing the counts from the useCounter. Now this is a very simple example of using hooks to manage state within an application. The problem actually doesn't go away when you scale up and use multiple components with multiple hooks that provide the functionality required by those components. One of the solutions that my team has been using is moving it out from hooks and into MobX. Because MobX lives outside of the React component, it can manage state much better than React can with its render lock-in. As always, thank you for joining me for this lesson, and if you want to see more free content like this and want to support the channel, subscribe, like, and share it with your friends. Till next time, bye.